Good afternoon, and thank you very much. We have had an extraordinary day devoted to sustainable finances, and now we have the last panel, which is, I think, very interesting and very challenging, that has to do with stock markets, securities, market supervisor, and sustainable finance. I think that this is a really relevant issue, and I appreciate very much the support of CNMV to prepare this panel. Thank you very much for coming, and it's my pleasure to give the floor to Ana Martínez-Pina, the Vice Chair of the Spanish Stock Market Commission. Thank you very much. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, and welcome to this panel on sustainable finance that takes place here at the COP25. Thank you for your assistance, and I would like to especially thank you and welcome our panelists who have traveled from different parts of the world. So let me introduce them to you. On my right side, I have Gabriela Figueiredo. She's the chairman of the Comisão do Mercado de Valores Mobiliários from Portugal. Elisabeth Roegele, she's the executive director from Bafin from Germany, and then Kevin Cowan, he's commissioner of the Chile Securities Market Authority. So I especially welcome you, and maybe just a quick introduction, because before I give the floor to the three of you, nowadays we talk a lot about sustainability, sustainable growth, and sustainable finance. But the aim of this panel is to focus on the role securities regulators have regarding sustainable finance. So in order to do so, we will go through the activities that securities regulators are developing, and also we would see how they interact mainly with issuers, listed entities, asset managers, and investment firms. There is no official or single definition of sustainable finance, but we could say that sustainable finance means or implies taking into consideration environmental, social, and governance factors, what we know as ESG, in the investment decision making process. In fact, due to the increased demand on financial products and investments that take into account ESG factors, many initiatives are being carried out, and many different pieces of legislation are being approved at international and European level. For a few examples, we have at European level the Directive of Non-Financial Information that was approved in 2014. Also, the Commission Action Plan was approved in 2018 that included several measures in order to promote a sustainable growth. And then afterwards, we have the disclosure regulation on sustainability risks and sustainability investment that was approved this year and is going to be published soon. The regulation on taxonomy that is now being debated among the European, or between the European co-legislators, or the green bond standard that hopefully we will have it next year. So at the CNMV, we're following very closely all these initiatives, and we see a growing interest in what we can call green products. Up to now, we have registered 17 collaborative funds. These funds give part of their fees to non-for-profit organizations, and we have also registered 37 ESG funds that address the funds they capture to ESG projects. So maybe we could start by this, and I would ask this question to the three of you. Do you think there's an increase of demand of these green products, investment funds or investment bonds? And do you think investors, and especially retail investors, are aware of these new products? So maybe we could start with Gabriela.
Thank you very much, Ana. First of all, let me thank you for the invitation to participate in this roundtable, this panel today. It's a pleasure being here and having the opportunity to share with you some thoughts and some insights about sustainable finance and about what we are doing in Europe and in Portugal. And the answer is, of course, yes. There is a general trend, a clear overall trend towards ESG investments. The sustainability concerns, investors are growingly concerned about sustainability issues, but also the industry is positioning itself by offering new products and participating in this movement in an active way. And this is, as I said, a general overall trend. But speaking specifically from about what's happening in Portugal, well, there are some surveys which have been undertaken recently about the interest that investors have in these ESG products and investments. And what they tell us is that, in a general global perspective, is that the interest is growing, the number of products available is also growing, and that Portugal is above the average in what regards the interest and the concerns of investors in this kind of investment. So it's still something that is beginning. We are at the start, but so far what we have seen is a very rapid, quick movement, transition in this awareness of investors, not only about the importance, the overall importance of ESG factors and elements, but also their requirement, their requests to the industry to be provided with appropriate instruments, appropriate products, and of course, but we'll talk about it later, about appropriate disclosure and information about what they can exceed and about the performance and about the functioning of these products and of these markets.
And in Germany, Elisabeth, do you see an increased demand on ESG products?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes? Now it's better. First of all, thank you very much also for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here at this event. I think it is a very important event, and it's very important to talk about what the financial sector, how the financial sector can contribute to sustainability. You asked, is there an increase of investor demand with regard to sustainable products? And at Bafin we decided last year to start to create our own database, and we conducted a survey under 1,000 investors which want to invest in the next month. And we asked them, are you interested to invest in sustainable products? We used a German term, of course, but the first result of this survey was that around 60% were not aware what sustainability is at all. And then we asked and we explained to the investors in this online survey what sustainable products are. And then 80% of the possible investors, they said, okay, now when I have understood what sustainable investments are, I'm interested in such products. So we expect that there is an increase of investor demand for sustainable products. But a little bit as Gabriela mentioned, the next topic all these people mentioned to us in this online survey is how can we trust what a real sustainable product is. I think there's a little bit of awareness that perhaps not all products here which are called sustainable are sustainable, and therefore for all these investors it's really important. They want to do and then they want to invest in sustainable products. It's not clear to them what are really sustainable products, and they need some kind of safety net that they know what are the real sustainable products. That was very important from this survey. The plan is to have the survey every 2 years so that we see is there really an increase of awareness by the investors, but we expect that this will increase.
So maybe investors are afraid of the greenwashing, and here's where maybe securities regulator have a role to play in implementing all the new legislation and standards. Okay. And Kevin, what about Chile?
First of all, thank you very much, Ana, for the invitation. Thanks to the Commission for hosting this. I think it's obviously a very timely discussion, and for us from Chile, particularly interesting to be able to participating in this in Madrid. As to your question, the answer is yes, and we're seeing it from from at least three perspectives. The private sector in Chile has been active with several initiatives concentrated around the Chilean Stock Exchange to produce guidance regarding ESG standards, guidance towards PRI. It's also, the Chilean Stock Exchange has gone into a strategic alliance with Dow Jones to produce a sustainability index. And a large part of our institutional investors, two of the larger pension funds and most of the larger fund managers have signed up to a sustainable investment declaration. So we see from the private sector a set of initiatives which go along this line. We've also seen the issuance of 9 private sector bonds which are either green or blue, with significant interest from local and foreign investors. And also the Chilean public sector recently issued 2 green bonds, one in the US dollars and one in euros, which again with significant interest. The first was 12 times oversubscribed. So I think we're seeing both from initiatives and actual demand and interest. As for the concerns, I think they're very much what has been flagged in the panel. I think many of the institutional investors are showing some concerns about what is actually clear green products and how much we are actually seeing potential greenwashing. So I think that's something I know we'll discuss later, but I think is also. As for retail investors, I think really at this stage it's much less developed. And I think there we have an additional challenge. One thing is to establish information standards for institutional investors, and then I think we also potentially moving forward have to think about for retail investors how to make this information accessible at the retail level so that they can actually understand if they think they're buying something that is green, that there's also a certification there for the retail investors.
So there's also a need of awareness maybe to retail investors so that they know these products and okay. Well, as I said at the beginning, in Europe, many different regulations are being approved and many different standards and guidance. And what about Chile? Are similar initiatives taking place?
So I think we see as securities regulator that it's at our core mandate to make sure that information is provided in a timely, accurate and complete manner. And I think really what we see from the increased demand is that there is this increased demand for broader information, in particular in the social and environmental aspects. So in this line, what we've set up is a work program over the next year or so, in which we want to sort of bring to public consultation our own norms that pick up some of these aspects. The first, which we actually put out for public consultation last week, is enhanced reporting standard on the impact of listed firms, Chile listed firms, in environmental, social areas in particular. So environmental, we're talking about resource use, recycling, carbon footprint. In social, we're talking about compliance or resources spent in anti-money laundering, commitment to fair competition, hiring practices. So, and what we did really was take a subset of the indicators in the GRI, had a look at what Chilean firms were reporting in their corporate sustainability, and set out a subset of those metrics, basically with a measurement component and also with a target and policy component. And the idea is to have a broad discussion over the next 6 months with the industry and with stakeholders as to how to do this. That would be the first step. The second step is to bring out an enhancement of our corporate governance norms, both in how firms are dealing with environmental and social issues and how they're reporting the risks, drawing on discussions on the TCFD. And then finally, we want to see how we can work further in terms of defining taxonomies. So really it's this 3-layer approach. We think that having the information on the impact, then on management, is also a key component for institutional investors and to be able to get into sustainable practices and reports. So that's more or less how we're moving forward. And as I said, this is the first step, and we very much look forward to having a very broad discussion with stakeholders of this new norm.
So the situation is quite similar to the situation we have in Europe, where regulation is being approved on the three, on the environmental, social, and governance.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So maybe, Gabriela, the Directive on Non-Financial Information was approved in 2014. It has been mandatory since 2017. Do you supervise how listed entities are reporting this new non-financial information? Do you see it as a challenge? Because this information is quite new. It's not only financial, but now non-financial information. How are you dealing with this new reporting?
Before telling you about the supervision of non-financial information and non-financial information directive, let me tell you that this information about ESG elements is crucial to allow for an appropriate environment for ESG to develop. So I think it's one of the critical milestones of sustainable finance, and where we have to put a lot of efforts and focus to ensure that information is accurate and timely, as Kevin said, but also clear, understandable, standardized and comparable. In this sense, and in the light of these concerns, of course, the non-financial information directive and its supervision is also critical. And answering to your question, yes, we are already supervising the implementation of the non-financial information directive, and we are doing so since starting 2018. So since the non-financial information directive became mandatory, what we are doing is twofold. We are firstly ensuring or trying to ensure that all listed companies actually report on non-financial information. That is, that they issue some reports, that they are complying with the obligation of making public and disclosing what they are doing together with financial information or beyond financial information, to say something more about the companies, listed companies' expectations, concerns, responsibilities, and about ESG elements. In addition to that, of course, we are looking inside the reports, into the reports, and trying to understand if the content of these reports is actually accurate, actually meets the directive and the national laws requirements, and more than that, we are trying to understand if it meets the investors' expectations and needs. In this first, it's the first time that we are supervising the non-financial information directive, and we are trying not to be in this initial period too intrusive and too tough on issuers, but mostly try to make them to create some awareness, not only of the need and of the obligation to disclose, but also about the importance, the material importance of being clear and transparent about these dimensions, about these issues. So it's a lot about moral suasion, culture, dialogue, trying to bring them to this concern and to this purpose. We are also concerned, and this is also something that we are trying to ensure. We are also concerned to understand if what is being required to issuers is actually what investors need. And more than that, if what issuers are disclosing, it is actually being understood by investors. We think that it is no need to be tough on issuers on this non-financial information disclosure before we understand how useful investors deem this information to be and what their needs are with respect to information. As I think Elisabeth said, of course, Portuguese investors are also concerned as well as the industry about the right way to disclose about non-financial information. We had a public consultation launched at the end of 2018. We gathered a lot of information and responses from where we got some, we were able to take some conclusions. But the main request from the market to the regulator is, please make us understand what we should report, and from the investor side, make sure that what is reported is understandable. So this is our focus, is that before being tough on them and before enforcing the non-financial information disclosure directive and regulations, is to understand if it's exactly what it's needed, and try, before we come out with something like a guidance or standardized reporting rules. We are trying to understand what is needed, but we don't exclude the possibility of later on coming up with some guidance or some kind of guidelines to the industry, so that we are sure that the report goes in the right way, in the right direction, and that it is clear and useful for investors. Because if we don't do so, it risks being only an additional burden without the usefulness that we expect from this information, which is, of course, crucial and very important.
Something we have also noticed these 2 years, that the information can be reported according to many different frameworks, and issuers are a little bit lost, because some of them report information according to the climate change task force or the GRA, and the reporting is very different among issuers, and there's no clarity, and they ask about they need guidance. But do we always tell them that the guidance, we would prefer that the guidance is approved at European level, so the information is comparable among issuers at European Union level?
It would be the best way to deal with it. As I said, so far we haven't set up any kind of guidance, but if we can do it at the European level, it would be the best way. Also because, as you said, investors are afraid of greenwashing, and if we don't make sure that there is standardized, understandable, simple and credible, most of all, information, it will not contribute to the growing of ESG and sustainable finance. It is important that we make sure that sustainable finance remains credible, and for it to remain credible, we have to avoid greenwashing, and to avoid greenwashing, we have to make sure that we have the right information, and to have the right information, we have to rely on common criteria, common good data and reliable data, and also probably some rating on the products that allow investors to compare and to get some trust on these products.
Thank you. There's another regulation that has been approved. It has not been published in the European Union official journal, which is the regulation on disclosure of sustainable investments and sustainability risks. That is going to imply that mainly asset managers and investment firms are going to disclose how they take into account ESG factors when they develop their activity, they invest, they give their advice. Elisabeth, how do you think these investment firms and asset managers are facing these new disclosure obligations? Do you think they are ready? How are you going to face the information you receive from them also?
So I think first of all, this new disclosure framework is very important to have a common understanding, to have to give the investor the possibility to take an informed decision, to have a comparable situation that you can compare the products. Here, I think, therefore, this disclosure legal framework is very important. It's a big step forward in my eyes. I think the challenge is here to find a solution which is pragmatic and is not an overload on information on the side of the investor, and also not too detailed for smaller firms, because they have to handle this, and they should also have the possibility to be in the market and to have the chance to provide products in this area. And therefore we have to balance the two sides here. First of all, the investor needs to have disclosure, and also the production of this disclosure should be not over burdensome, I would say. So I think important is here that we have someday very good databases, and we see that there are developments also in databases to give more standards, to develop standards here. And I think this is a good progress that we go for more standardization here. Perhaps with regard to retail investors especially, we have on the one hand, we should avoid greenwashing. I think this is very important, that investors are not frustrated because their investment is not really green at the end of the day. We also should make clear to investors that a sustainable investment or a green investment is not the guarantee that no fallout will happen in the future. This is also something we should take into account, and we include now more and more in the suitability assessment under the MiFID II regulation. I think it will be published hopefully soon by the Commission, the next step here, that in the suitability assessment ESG criteria are also implemented, and the investors are at least asked if they want to invest in sustainable products. But from our perspective, it shouldn't be the only criteria in the future, because otherwise we are misleading also the investors that sustainable products are a guarantee for safe, secure performances, which is not the case. We should be aware of that. Therefore, I think all this new regulation, disclosure on the one hand, but also what we have also advised to at ESMA level are important things. But we should be aware that we are not overruling all the other topics we have to assess in the investment advice process.
And just a quick question to the three of you. These new reporting obligations on this ESG information requires resources also from the regulator. Do you have people that are expert in this non-financial information? Because this is one of the challenges we have, and I guess you too. I don't know. Do you think you need experts in this new information? Elisabeth or Kevin or?
I mean, I think the quick answer is not yet. But I think we're very much aware that if these requirements will have any validity, they have to be effectively supervised. So one of the priorities moving forward is to be able to develop the skills over the next years to be able to supervise this in an effective way. We have some experience we had a previous requirement in terms of some inclusion aspects, so some lessons with that. But obviously we need to upgrade our skills in terms of the people and in terms of the process to be able to process this effectively. I think the approach that Portugal mentioned in terms of initial phase, which is very much understanding what is being reported, how it is being reported, before moving into a more intrusive supervision, if you want. It makes a lot of sense, in part also because it's something that as a supervisor has been traditionally outside our scope, and we also want to be careful that we also have the skill sets to be able to move forward in that. So the quick answer is no, but we're aware of that, and it's part of the process moving forward to be able to. And I think it's also part of the process moving forward more broadly in how we approach climate risk. In this case, we're also insurance and bank regulator, and we're putting quite a lot of chips on experience sharing. We've applied to join the NGFS because we think that's something that we as a supervisor need to invest on, not only in the security space but also in insurance and banking, to be able to understand the risks and also see how we report those risks back to the market.
Gabriela, are you hiring new people, new experts?
So, just like you, the answer is not yet. But let me be clear about this. I think it's inevitable in the future, in not a distant future, that we will have to rethink our resources, not only in face of this challenge, but other challenges that we are facing. But at the same time, it's impossible that we create internal capacity to check all and every sustainable investments and to check if they are green or if they are not green. So I think that just like we have experts in financial information, we will have to have experts in non-financial information. Just like auditors will sooner or later will have to look into these issues, but we will have to rely on any kind of standardized, common understanding of what is sustainable and what is not sustainable. The big challenge here is to find the right balance between being formal and checking in the box, which of course will not be the best way to help ESG movement to develop, and we should avoid it, and we should dig into the reality of things and understand if there is greenwashing or green painting or anything. But at the same time, we as regulators, we cannot in Portugal, but I think it's the same reality for everybody, we cannot create internal capacity to dig into the investments and to the financial information and understand if that is green or that is not green because it helps environment or not. It's about creating common understanding, common criteria, common benchmarks and taxonomy, of course, and we will have to rely on it, of course, avoiding being formal or superficial in our approaches. Let me just add something. I know it was not about, your question was not about it, but I'd like to add something to what I said about financial information. Your question was about the non-financial information directive, but we also have to look into other dimensions of the problem, which is pre-marketing information, which is not related with this non-financial information report, but once we have ESG products being distributed and marketed, we will have to look very closely to what financial intermediaries are doing and the stories that they are telling to investors, because we can have problems coming close when the number of financial products with ESG elements embedded are being distributed. So it's the other part of the story about information, ESG information. And there, I think we will have to, of course, look into MiFID. The amendments are being proposed in a very light approach, which is the right one, I must say, for the time being. But I think that general MiFID rules should apply, and we will have to ensure that we have the same level of clarity, accuracy in the information that is being given to investors when the products are being marketed.
Well, just one last question. I think we think that investors are expecting securities regulators to do something about sustainable finance to avoid greenwashing. But what do you think the role of securities regulators should be on sustainable finance? Do you think we have to contribute or promote awareness, to issue educational campaigns? What do you think our role should be, Elisabeth?
I think there's really a role for us as securities regulators. I have first of all to say that Bafin is not only a securities regulator, we are integrated supervisor, and we try to make aware investors what is sustainability. We are also making aware the side of the issuers of the products and the insurance sector, the banking sector. We created within Bafin a network with all experts, and we try to exchange views because the insurance sector is investing in asset management products, so there should be an aligned approach to sustainability. And also, I think to create more awareness, we organized roundtables with the industry, and now we will publish soon a guidance to the industry what our expectation is, how they should include in their risk management tools all these sustainability risks. And this is very important for us to make both sides aware of what is ongoing in the area of sustainability, the asset management side, the insurance side on the one hand, banking side, and on the other hand, the investors. I think education is very important here. It is a new task for our consumer protection department to explain what are the key factors of sustainability on the one hand, what are the products here, but also on the other hand to say sustainability is not everything. So risk awareness, how long you want to invest, what is your experience, what are your needs, is also important.
Kevin, what do you think our role is?
Several thoughts on that. The first is, again, as Bafin, we're also an integrated supervisor, so we are approaching this from various dimensions. And I think insurance is one particularly interesting dimension because they are both a source of long-term finance for mitigation. They have portfolios exposed to climate change. And obviously they provide potentially very useful services for mitigation adaptation, especially in lower income. So I think there's obviously a very key role in insurance. Banking similar, but more from the asset perspective and how they're managing risk. So that's something we want to move forward on. And I think in this sense, two thoughts. One is that we've been participating actively on a series of initiatives in coordination with the Finance Ministry and the Ministry of Environment, looking at a comprehensive strategy and how the finance sector can contribute. And I think as insurance, securities and banking regulators, we have a lot to put forward in those discussions because of the technical capacity and the know-how. So I think that's something that given the significance of what we're going through, particularly with climate change, is something that we need to be involved. And I think the experience so far has been positive, and a lot of work to follow through. And in terms of education, really, I think here we have a lot of catching up to do in general in financial education. So here is one area in which I think the environmental, social, it can be there, but at least in Chile we have a lot to move forward on basic financial education. So I wouldn't jump to put it too far ahead. We have a lot of other things to do, firms, in terms of people understanding products, risks, which we think are as important as these factors.
Gabriela.
Thank you, Ana. Yes, of course, there is a role for regulators in this story. And I think that our role is not very different from our role in all other issues that we have to supervise. Our goal as financial regulators, with small differences between between different countries. Our role is to ensure investor protection, fair and orderly markets, and financial stability. And that's what we have to do with regard to ESG and sustainable finance, is to ensure that investors are protected when investing in ESG products, that markets function in a fairly and orderly way, and that there are no impacts, or if there are some impacts, that are mitigated with regard to financial stability. What does this mean? This means, with regard to investor protection, that we have to have all the safeguards in place with respect to information, and again, non-financial information, but also pre-marketing information, that there is no greenwashing, that they have all the information needed to take and to make conscious and accurate investment decisions. This is what it is about. It's avoiding that they go into wrong decisions because they don't have enough or clear information. When you talk about fair and orderly markets, it means that everybody has to have the same information at the same time, and that the prices of the products are formed according to the information that people have, and which is accurate and real, reflects the value and the fundamentals of the assets. And when we are talking about protecting financial stability, this means that we have to be aware that there can be some problems or impacts arising from sustainable finance, which can harm financial stability, and make sure that we have the right mitigation or supervision tools in place to avoid them. Well, so I don't think that the role of the regulator is that different with regard to sustainable finance from what we are used to do. But of course, this is a common effort, this is a collective effort for the regulators, for the market stakeholders, and for governments, and I would say mostly for governments. We can do a lot, we should do a lot about sustainable finance, but the biggest role, I think, it's for the governments and not for us. Which doesn't at all mean that we shouldn't play our part in this, our role in this story. And well, for instance, when we contribute with everything that, for instance, Elisabeth said, we should stay close to the market, we should undertake all the initiatives to make sure that we understand what the market needs, what the investor needs, but also that the market and stakeholders, they are aware of their responsibilities. So this engagement between market and the investors is key, and we should do it by putting in place all the initiatives and measures that we can. But it's more than that, and we have some tools or means to somehow incentivize, according to our role, again, because it's not our role to make sure that sustainable finance will be successful or to moralize or to whatever. But for instance, there is a role for asset managers and institutional investors to play, because they have the biggest responsibility in taking this opportunity, because sustainable finance is an opportunity for them, but to taking it in a very responsible way to make sure that they are a part of the solution for the transition and not a part of the problem. And well, I could say a lot about that, but for instance, the idea that de-investing in not sustainable projects, it's the way to deal with a problem. It can be, but we can also think about more active and proactive ways of contributing to the transition, which is to stay and not to leave. It's more voice than exits. To stay and by voting in the general meetings and so on, forcing and contributing for the transition to happen. And this is something that we as regulators, we can also put an eye on it, because in the end it's about reinventing or rebuilding the the fiduciary duty of asset managers, and this is for us to supervise and for us to make sure that they are effectively delivering on their fiduciary duties.
Thank you. So maybe just to conclude, and I think we're out of time, but basically what we see is that securities regulators have maybe mainly two roles. One is to guarantee that the information on how our investors, our issuers, investment firms and asset managers, how this information the information they disclose is reliable, is clear, is complete, and also we have a role maybe and room for launching educational campaigns and awareness, mainly with the objective of investor protection, which is one of our main goals as securities regulators. So, thank you for your assistance again. Thank you especially to the three of you for accepting our invitation to this session, and I hope that we will have more time and another occasion to deal with how securities regulators integrate ESG factors also in their activity. So thanks a lot. Thank you.